COOGS House. All right, after an exciting victory in Memphis, completed by a last-second shot by Jamal Shead, we ask the question, is Jim Nantz right when at the buzzer he claims number one remains number one?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who can't stop by, please be sure to subscribe. That way the latest in the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. It's good to see you again. Remember, we are giving away a Letterman jacket at 750 subscribers. We are like 742 as of the recording of this podcast. So being sure you get one of those jackets that somebody want to hit 750, and then we'll be giving away something else at 1,000 as well. So we're going to continue to give away things every 250 subscribers. So make sure you subscribe below, get us there, and then be commenting and liking videos so we know who to give the jacket to. Now, if you watch this whole episode and you're kind of still aghast, jaw on the floor, you don't know what to say after beating Memphis in that manner, tell us what kind of cheese you like to put on your cheeseburger. Now, a couple things here. One, we're going to look at the first segment, a couple of stars of the game, obviously starting off with Jamal Shead. Second, look at like some bigger picture things that led to this win. The word culture comes up a few different times in that segment. And then in the third segment, we're talking about like how this impacts Houston maintaining the number one seed. And look, can they be the number one team overall come the March Madness tournament? Jim Nantz, UH alum, certainly made it known that he thinks they are at the end of the game. But first, let's talk some about the growth of Jamal Shead and this game. Now, Kelvin Sampson said after the game that one of the things that's benefited this team, and this also comes up in the culture segment in segment 2, is that they're not afraid of failure. They're not afraid to fail. They will not be afraid to fail. Frankly, that not being afraid to fail, you can see that when Jamal Shead is dribbling the ball and it's his turn to shoot the shot at the end of this game. Jamal Shead himself said after the game that he remembered a little over a year ago at this point now, it's the fall of 2021 at the Maui Invitational, right? Houston's playing Wisconsin. Houston's top 15 in the country, and frankly, has their full roster, right? Houston made the Elite Eight last year, but we both know that their roster was kind of depleted after a couple of big injuries. They look really, really talented coming off of a Final Four the year before last, November? November. And they have the ball, they get a rebound with about 6 seconds left. Jamal Shead is driving on the floor and kind of in range to take a floater. Jamal Shead tries to pass the ball to Kyler Edwards. Kyler Edwards, now in the G League, catches the ball after the buzzer, right? The ball was in the air when the buzzer sounded on the pass. That learning experience from failure a year ago directly translated to this game, right? So as we go through like the last shot first, I don't know if that's a dessert first kind of metaphor or what it is, but Jamal Shead takes the ball off the inbounds pass and is driving, and you see him looking around as he's going, but you also see his head look at the clock as he catches the ball like to take off across the full court. And so he knew how many seconds he had, how many bounces he had, etc., playing the situation over in his mind. And because he had that learning experience a year ago, in this instance, he knew when to bump off the defender, raise, and fire, as opposed to raise and look to pass the ball. Now, he said that as he was bringing the ball off the floor, and as he went initially tried to go off the screen from Juwan Roberts and came back to his right hand, he did have his eyes up looking for other guys and admits that he saw himself as the fifth option of 5 on the floor, but then he got over to his right hand, got the guy off of him, pulled up for a jumper, wetted it. By the time that Jim Nantz is talking about how this is the number one team in the country, he's in midcourt getting mobbed by his buddies, right? Great scene, great time. However, you don't get that moment without the other one. I should point out that this was a Jamal Shead-led game. Jamal Shead himself had 16 points. He and Tramon Mark both had 16 to lead the Cougars in points. He had 7 assists, which also led the Cougars. 2 of 7 3-point line, 6 of 16 from the field, played 39 of the 40 minutes. I think the bigger thing to me, though, was his poise down the stretch. Yes, he led the team in points, but he had important baskets. Houston is tied 63-60, or sorry, is at 60. Yeah, tied 63-63. He hits a floater off the right side of the glass to get to 65 right before Memphis comes down and has there a couple times and scores, right? Like he then gets the ball and then hits his big shot. But people forget like 2.5 minutes earlier to get to 63, he also had the pump fake in the lane, the lane go with the left hand. Like he had key made baskets down the stretch that were kind of otherwise broken plays, right? I guess the one that you could argue is at least somewhat of an organized screen and roll was that layup to get to 63 with like 3 minutes to go. But like at the same time, because Jamal Shead is not a score first type of point guard typically, I mean, he can score, obviously, but because he's not typically a score first kind of guy, I guess you could argue the real trick there was trying to get the ball into the paint and kick it out, and in the paint and kick it out. But on the whole, like Jamal Shead had himself a day, and I want to say a day because it was played 11 o'clock Central Time, but I want to say a night, I guess, but that's what we're going to say is called a day. Huge moment for Jamal Shead, and frankly, just led to proving that there is no one you can leave open on this Houston Cougar basketball team. There is no one that can't beat you, right? Tramon Mark can beat you. Juwan Roberts, asked Memphis from the first time, can beat you. Jarace Walker can beat you. Ask Virginia. Marcus Sasser can beat you. Ask anyone in the American Athletic Conference. Jamal Shead on Sunday proved he can beat you. Anyone on the team can beat you. Anyone starting five can beat you. And truthfully, that's what makes this team so dynamic. When people that don't watch this team will go, hey, Parker, what are we looking for when we look at Houston? I'm like, you're looking at a phenomenal, best defensive team in the country and a bunch of dudes that can hoop on offense. And they figure out who the hot hand is. I can't tell you who's going to score next week. They're going to show it, right? I should point out, though, that, I said Jamal Shead had 16 points that tied Tramon Mark for the most on the team. Tramon Mark did come out of the gate super hot. I mean, he had like a basket on a great they double teamed Juwan. Juwan kicked it out to him. He pump fake, went to midi Mark right from the mid range. Had a steal, had a layup, had a block, came down for a three, like boom, like back and forth. In the first 10 minutes, he was clearly dominating the basketball game in a way that like he feeds off of opponents, right? He feeds off opponents' crowds for sure. Houston is undefeated on away from home this season against neutral floors and road and true road gyms, because of guys like him that play with that edge where they can kind of fill in the gaps where like, it wasn't Juwan Roberts' best game. We got Tramon. The crowd might be bothering our freshman Jarace back in like December, but we got Tramon, right? Like those kinds of things get filled in by him. 16 points on 10 shots. I'm telling you, he had like, I guess it's 1 second half make was somewhere around like the 4-minute mark where Houston, I guess, just breaking. I think it was the shot that got Houston to 58. Tough contest in the lane. He goes up through it, finishes with contact. He finished a couple with contact, and I'd argue one of his missed threes he actually got fouled on, and they called it a block. But digressing, it's hard not to talk about like the double clutch layup or the Tramon Mark first half in part of this victory too, right? Like he was the guy, it seemed like for a long time in the first half. Memphis was like, hey, if he's going to beat us, he's going to beat us. And then they were down by 8. Like, oh, crap, he's the one that's going to beat us today. Like he's that kind of guy as well. When he's got the mid-range game going and the three-point line, because you can't close out to him at the three because of a pump fake, one dribble, pull up. But he also, if you like sag off and try and keep the pull up, will wet it in your face. So like he's good at all those things. Tramon Mark's really impactful in this game. That's not to diminish Marcus Sasser's 13 points. The way they cover him is different, and the way they cover him obviously opens up other guys as well. Jarace Walker had some important stretches. He went 2 of 5 from 3-point line. So those first two clinches, like, oh gosh, it's gonna be one of those kind of days. And they kind of got in his rhythm over the course of it. I loved his little turn on right hook. I think he had 2 out of 3 from that area. Little dream shake, pops his right, come back to his left shoulder, put his right hook up. Couple of those are really, really nice in the lane. On the whole, we'll get to more of this in the second segment. We talk about like what won this game schematically for Houston. Again, culture comes in to be a big part of that, even though it's not a scheme. They were content with finding him in the post, Jarace, that is, and working off of him that way. Whereas Juwan did have an assist, I guess, they had to get the ball out of his hands on the post because of what Memphis was doing to him. I want to get more into that in a second, but first, let's talk about our buddies at Built. Now, if you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, then you've got to try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and I know my goal is to eat a little bit healthier this year. If you're like me and you want to eat healthier, but you don't want to compromise on taste, then man, I've got just the thing for you. You got to try Built. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious. You won't think they're good for you. Perfect for your New Year's resolution. What makes Built Bar so good? Well, for starters, they're all covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is that they are healthy. Only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein in most bars. And now you don't need to wait around and get a box. For years, we've been talking about going to Built.com to order your Built bars. Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy, and grab yourself a box of Built bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. If you're close to a Sam's Club, you can run in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie batter, and churro. You can thank me later. I am going to continue to recommend, though, as a teacher, grabbing a couple of those things on the way at the door to breakfast every morning. Coconut almond is an almond joy. All right. So in the second segment, I said I want to say a little bit about kind of the schematic things that won this game. But on the whole, and I opened talking about Jamal Shead's failure a little over a year ago and how that directly tied to this game. Sampson talked about over and over again how this team is not afraid to fail. And to Sampson's credit, and I said this back when I was offering my criticism a couple weeks ago at this point, their failure in the zone against East Carolina, against Temple for a stretch, against a handful of teams that run the zone defense out for a couple of minutes, and it failed. And I was critical of, like, why are we doing this for a few minutes at the end of the game? Came back to win the game in a lot of ways today, or Sunday, I should say. I'm recording at the end of the day Sunday. It's actually, I guess technically it's almost Monday. But those failures in zone led directly to what Houston will do to shut down Memphis in the second half of this basketball game. And even their failures in their own first half of this game with the zone, because what it did was it slowed down Memphis's offense and it kept them off the foul line. On the whole, Memphis shot 23 free throws in this basketball game. It was 21 to 23 from the free throw line. That is uncharacteristically high. Memphis is a notoriously, we'll say, less than average free throw shooting team. They got a high number of them and shot a crazy high percentage of them. Kendric Davis himself shot 11 to 12 from the free throw line. Huge shooting day for them. They definitely rode the home crowd on their way there. However, when Houston went zone, they were less apt to foul. They made Memphis make other mistakes. Now, did they bleed a few baskets here and there? And yes, but it took long possessions for that to happen. And when Houston had their lead down the stretch, they were okay with that, right? It was like, oh, if you're going to take 30 seconds to score and we're not stopping the clock and you get free throws, we can keep this thing running, right? We'll be okay. I was hypercritical of this team when they had failures in the zone early in the season because it's not the best defense they run. They're the best team in the country when they're in man-to-man defense. They have the top-ranked defense in a lot of different metrics, and they base almost entirely out of a primarily, I call it a 55 with a blitz in the ball screen kind of defense, right? Like that. It's not crazy difficult to see, but when they change it up, you saw them make Memphis think. Memphis had to realize, oh man, we practiced all week with a game plan. They had hit it this way, hit this, hit that. And it was kind of successful. And then they had to go change up what they're doing. Not that it didn't lead them scoring. They just had to think through what they're doing and had to slow them down some. So my bad, coach. Go work there. Again, like there's a reason he's Coach Sampson and I coach where I coach. But I do think that it's worth pointing out that like that is growth off of those same failures. That 5 minutes or so, they went about 6.5 minutes without a field goal, but 5 minutes of that was without a point in the second half was so crucial. Houston goes from down 5 to up 5 on a 10-0 run that spanned about 3 minutes of the last 5 minutes. That is so tremendous, so important in these tight March basketball games. And for all the flaws of Memphis, they've played 15 single-digit basketball games this season. That should have been in their wheelhouse, right? That Houston is winning by the NCAA D1, whatever, like top margin of victory, like blowing teams out of the water by and large. I mean, we talked about 38-point wins before. You and I talked about 28-point wins before. Like it's nothing. Memphis is playing everything nip and tuck, and that should have been the kind of game they were super comfortable with. And you kind of saw it down the stretch, like when they got the offensive rebound and were quick, like able to find Kendric Davis really quickly. They also like their shot they got off right before that they got the offensive rebound on was like fairly like well run play. All of those things, right, indicate that that team is comfortable in the clutch, and it didn't matter, right? Houston was able to out-clutch the team that is as comfortable in the clutch as anybody in America. And it was fascinating to see, like, again, Houston was just ready for the moment in an interesting way. I want to talk about culture and, like, how that ties into a lot of this. I mean, the toughness you saw, a bunch of offensive rebounds. Houston had 9 offensive rebounds in a game where every single play was contested. On the whole, they're technically out-rebounding this game. I don't want to get too crazy about some of those. I mean, like Houston also had 6 blocks. So are those just the way the angle blocked end up falling back in the hands of Memphis. And those do count as rebounds. But I think the interesting thing to me was not necessarily like every single rebound they got. I feel like every single offensive rebound they got turned into good offense for Houston. So it's really like valuing the ball and valuing possessions, even though they had 14 turnovers. And like I could talk about the Jarace Walker's bad travel, but the turnover I want to talk about that's actually demonstrated the culture of me was a few 3 possessions later, when Marcus Sasser's getting trapped up by the half court line. So Houston has called a timeout. There's about 30 seconds left. They're trying to get the ball in. They get the ball into Marcus Sasser in the backcourt, and he dribbles to the one spot on the floor that you're probably not supposed to against a trap. But Sasser has been known in his time in Houston to welcome the trap and then pass out of it. So the trap comes to him as he crosses half court. He's got what we call, as I coach, the 4 defenders: the half court line, the out of bounds line, and then the 2 actual defenders, right, keeping them in a 4-person box kind of. And so you see across the court, Sampson is flipping his lid, trying to get a timeout called before Sasser releases the ball. It is visible. I can pause it right now as I pull up the game. He is clearly calling a timeout and in the ref's ear across from the court where this is happening, right? No timeout called. Sasser flips the ball to Jarace. Jarace is trying to fall out of bounds and catch it. The ball goes out of bounds. It's Memphis's ball, right? Other teams, other cultures, teams that are not the number 1 team in the country collapse there. They're flipping out for the next 10 minutes, the next 5 minutes, the next 30 seconds of gameplay, which would have been the rest of the basketball game for sure, about why they got screwed on that call. Houston, come on, man, gets in the huddle. They're ready to go, right? Like, we're done, right? That's all it took. We got to play basketball. Like, there's basketball left to be played. We can't complain about this now. And that's culture, and that's resilient winning culture that Sampson's built in his time here, right? That's we talk about how great Sampson is and how fantastic the program has been, how quickly, exponentially the program has risen with him at the helm. It's because of stuff like that, right? I also want to point out like that the same resiliency and the same like strength and culture was not shaken by crazy things happening. Like this guy, Chandler Lawson, I'm looking at this correct. He's made 3 threes all season. He shot 2 of 3 from the 3-point line against Houston, right? He didn't make a single 3 last year, right? He made 2 against Houston on Sunday. Like, again, instead of just throwing their hands like it's just not our night, they said, okay, he's shooting 3s. Got to close out. And then the third one, and we got to keep playing. We got to play on the 3-point line now, right? Like those kinds of things are not a thing, or not things every team does. Again, like I could go on and on more about the culture and schematic things. I thought it was interesting that in the first Memphis matchup, Penny let Juwan Roberts beat him, right? Penny Hardaway, Memphis coach, let Houston big man Juwan Roberts beat him with the block, had a career high to that point of 20 points, and they kept feeding him down low, feeding him in the drop spot, feeding him in the Mikan spot, etc. Pop, 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 right? In this game, they took that away. They said, we're going to double whoever's in the post every single time. Jarace kind of got a little work out of it. That was okay. And frankly, I thought Reggie Chaney did a really good job of rolling to it and hitting that spot on the run, so it's harder to double. He only got 4 points, so I thought it was interesting the way they used him. It clearly rattled or took Juwan Roberts out of the offense. Juwan Roberts did not, after having his, at the time, career high against Memphis the last time they played, he didn't attempt a field goal in this game. But there was no sulking, no punching chairs, no frustrations. It was just, hey, someone else got to do it tonight. And that was all the red and white needed, I guess red and black needed, right? That was all Houston needed in the Memphis game. It was like, hey, it's not Juwan's day. I need someone else. Insert Tramon Mark, insert Jamal Shead, insert somebody else. It was there, right? And that's, again, just not a thing everyone did. Now, you saw it on the very first play. They run the classic backstring cut to get Jawan Robertson on the block, and they doubled him like as soon as he caught it because they know Houston likes to go to Jawan Roberts early, like literally the first possession early every single basketball game, right? What they did was they doubled it, and then Houston started to cut through, clear the lane, popped to Tramon, pump fake, dribble, mid-range. It's Tramon's day, right? That was the way things are going to go in that basketball game. I want to talk a little bit how this game impacts Houston as a whole in the third segment. Before we move on to there, I should say that Kendric Davis, while it's hard to he's an SMU guy. He's technically a TCU guy before that, right? SMU guy, and then a Memphis guy, and I guess those are both teams that it's fun to hate on. He is really, really good at basketball, and he, as a Houstonian himself, right, did kind of take it to double teams and traps and things like that. And so what Houston did to adjust there was, he's getting a lot of calls attacking the trap here. They're going to soft switch, which means they switch and recover, right? And in those instances too, it's like this adjustment mid-game, like, hey, they practice too, they play too, they're pretty good too. We got to figure this out, right? And it was a really, really impressive, as a coach, I selfishly want to say coaching performance out of Kelvin Sampson. But the truth is he's not doing a whole bunch of he's not a quiet fella, but he's not doing a whole bunch of hollering mid-game. He's not tossing chairs like Bobby Knight, right? He's not ripping into guys on the sideline during free throws he's not doing all that stuff either, right? He's just built a program where those guys are doing it themselves because of stuff he's taught them in the past. I want to jump into, in the third segment, how this impacts being a number one overall seed. So let's get to it. And as a number one overall seed, I should point out first that what that means is when Selection Sunday is happening and your AD gets the call, you get the first pick as far as what region you're going to play in. It sounds like the closest and thus most likely first weekend scenario is going to be Alabama. Going to be playing in Birmingham. And I guess that is technically the closest. I'd like to know more about my options. And frankly, with the Final Four being in Houston, there's going to be no other tournament games in the state of Texas, doesn't look like, right? So it's Birmingham's going to be the closest. The Sweet 16 weekend, Sweet 16 Elite Eight, that round, the second weekend of the 3 weekends. I guess that's the one that's up for grabs. Where do you play? The big interesting discussion is that there's a weird world where Houston could play in any of them, right? Of the top tier teams, if UCLA does not make the cut for a 1 seed, Houston is the farthest west and would therefore be playing in Las Vegas, Nevada. Fun for the rest of us, but kind of a long way away from home for the Cougs, right? In some ways, they're the only team. I mean, if they're ranked higher than Kansas, then as a team higher than Kansas, they claim the central time zone, which means they're in Kansas City, Missouri, or Kansas City, Missouri, right there on the line, right? And so, again, that's, as long as they're not playing Kansas State or Kansas, that's fine, right? It's, I guess, the next closest to home. There's Louisville, Kentucky, right? If you call them the southernmost team or the highest ranked Southern team, but that's also not far from Alabama. We know that Alabama's in this thing in the same area. And then, frankly, there's some weird way where if you totally screwed Houston, you put Alabama, Kansas, and UCLA all above them, but they're still number 1 seed. They'd be playing in the Eastern region, which would put them in New York City. I mean, the Garden's fun, but that's really far away. And so it's if Houston can actually earn the 1 seed, they have some sort of a say in this. I don't know what Pesman would want. If he'd want Kansas City, if he'd want Vegas because it's a big place you can get your fans to, if he wants Louisville because it's not that far. I don't know what he wants. What I do know is that if you get the 1 seed, you at least get some say in it, right? If you get the number 1 overall seed, you get some say in it. And so I have to imagine that that's important. Jim Nance said at the end of the broadcast and then after the game, talking to Andy Yanez of Gallery Sports, that he thinks Houston can be the 1 overall seed with a good performance in the American Athletic Conference tournament. And he thinks they're at least a number 1 seed after their victory against Memphis. I would say that I kind of feel the same way about the number 1 seed against Memphis. I worry that if Kansas wins the Big 12 tournament and Alabama wins the SEC tournament and UCLA wins the Pac-12 tournament, you're going to have a hard time saying the number 1 overall team just based on conference tournament plays. And that may be kind of where it gets tricky, but we'll also see how those things go. I mean, we saw chaos happen all weekend long. I also will say that there's no reason Houston is not the number one team on Monday after regular season basketball is over, because they were getting votes to be the number one team in the country, and number 2 Alabama and number 3 Kansas both came to the great state of Texas and lost over the weekend. Right now, say what you want to say about Texas A&M, College Station, and Texas Austin, but both of those schools helped Houston out a whole lot by knocking off Alabama and Kansas respectively in the state of Texas, and kind of showing like, hey, yes, these are quad whatever victories, and that's a big big moment for those Texas schools. But it's also lost in the resume for Alabama and Kansas that Houston doesn't have. Right? Houston is undefeated away from home. Houston was up by 15 in one of their 2 losses this season, and Houston in the other loss had a layup at the buzzer that hit the back rim. Like, there's a not so crazy world where Houston is undefeated in this moment. Now, will Sampson point out to me, and I'm sure if Sampson watches this in one of the comments, or he'd probably point out, hey, if the Alabama game doesn't happen, you probably have a loss at a different point because they didn't learn the lesson, blah, blah, blah. Probably fair. Coach's cap on. That's probably true. I'm just pointing out that Houston is going to end up being almost undefeated on the season, and frankly, like, have better basketball left to play, right? Like, they're continuing to grow and develop as a team, and they're still like as good as anybody from a resume perspective. The big win for another top 5 team over the weekend was UCLA beating Arizona on Saturday by 9. That game was in Los Angeles, but if can UCLA jump from 4 to 1? I don't know. If there can be a victory on their like schedule that did it, it would be that one, right? So we'll see where they move to. Marquette struggled with St. John's. I guess they did win, but like Baylor and Kansas State both lost. Tennessee lost another one. They're kind of in a downslide to end the season. And so as you look at these things, I guess like Purdue at number 5 could move up. But I think Houston ought to be fairly solid to remain number 1. If you want to talk to me about all things Houston Cougars, football, basketball, baseball is coming up, Rockets, Astros, Texans, NFL draft, whatever, you can find me at Painsworth 512. It's PAINSWRTH 512 to talk all things Cougs. I'm happy to talk all things State of Houston. I'm also typically doing a game thread based on games. Now, obviously, I told you guys on Friday and Saturday's episodes that I wasn't going to be able to do that for the Memphis game. My wife and I had to go to what was an emotional weekend for her family. And so I want to say thanks to the folks that reached out and said something about that. Also, I want to say thanks to the people that were patient with me about not being able to do the game thread as I typically do. It's fun to interact with you guys and those kind of things, but I didn't get to do that this weekend. Obviously, we'll start back up with those on the American Athletic Conference Tournament on Friday. Just wasn't the moment for that this weekend. I need to be a family. I will say that, and I tweeted this out, and I'm very, very serious, getting that notification a little while after it happened that Jamal Shead had made a buzzer beater to beat Memphis was awesome. After what was a rough weekend, it was a rough weekend in a good way. It went as good as it could go. But it was a great notification to get. I also should point out that I wanted to make sure I waited to watch the whole game. And I should probably thank the Draftmatic on YouTube for posting the entire hour and 16-minute video of the Memphis game because games from CBS can be hard to find on the internet. So thank you to all of the people that had some part in hand in allowing this to still happen. Obviously, that's hopefully behind us for a little bit. And so we'll be all things Cougs, all things Houston all the time. So make sure you find me at Painsworth 512, PAINSWRTH 512 on Twitter, Instagram, and all these social media handles. If you're looking for a second listen of the day, I'm going to recommend Locked On College Basketball because Andy and Isaac know a great deal about college basketball, doing college basketball show each and every day. Their Monday show always has a 6-pack of things and recaps the big week in hoops and talks about who should be number 1 and those kinds of things. It's a very Cougar-friendly show, so I'm expecting some good news from that as well. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team, or in our case, the number 1 team in the country, every day.